They had a list. Not a suggestion, not a preference, a specific, deliberate list of foods that ancient physicians prescribed, that healers carried across deserts, that entire civilizations built their health around for 3,000 years. Foods mentioned by name in the oldest surviving medical texts on Earth. Foods referenced in Scripture not as symbols, not as metaphors, but as medicine. Specific plants, specific preparations, specific dosages, recorded with a precision that should embarrass the modern wellness industry. That list still exists. Every food on it still grows. Every compound in every plant on it still works exactly the way it worked 3,000 years ago. You have never been told about most of them. Not because the knowledge disappeared, because the knowledge was inconvenient. A plant you can grow in your backyard, prepare in your kitchen, and use without a prescription does not generate revenue. It does not create a returning customer. It does not build a quarterly earnings report. And somewhere between 1910 and 1950, in a series of regulatory decisions that most people have never heard of, the institutional infrastructure of modern medicine made a choice. Ancient botanical medicine was reclassified, defunded, written out of medical school curricula, replaced by patentable synthetic compounds that treated symptoms instead of causes and required lifetime subscriptions to maintain. 20 foods survived that erasure, not because they were protected, because they were hidden in a text that nobody thought to censor. I have studied every one of them. I have read the suppression history. I have found the clinical trials that were defunded mid-study. I have read the pre-1950 pharmacology literature that described these plants with a specificity and a confidence that modern herbalism has almost entirely lost. Before this video ends, you will have all 20. You will know what they are, what they do, why they disappeared, and what the ancient world understood about them that we spent a century trying to forget. But there are 2 on this list I need to warn you about specifically. Number 7 was the subject of a 1947 clinical trial in Edinburgh that showed results so significant the study was quietly defunded 3 weeks after the first paper was published. And number 13, the one the ancient world called the purification plant, contains compounds so structurally similar to modern antibiotics that researchers who study it still cannot fully explain the mechanism. I will get to both, but you need the foundation first. 20 foods, every one of them biblical, every one of them erased, every one of them still available to you right now. The ancient world did not use olive oil the way you use it. They did not drizzle it carefully over salads. They did not measure it into tablespoon portions. They poured it over food, over wounds, over sick bodies, over the heads of kings being consecrated to lead nations. The Bible references it over 140 times. That is not reverence for a cooking fat. That is documentation of a medicine so fundamental to daily survival that removing it from the cultural record would have been unthinkable. Modern pharmacology has spent 50 years trying to understand why. The answer is a compound called oleocanthal, a polyphenol found exclusively in high-quality, cold-pressed olive oil that functions almost identically to ibuprofen at the molecular level, blocking the same inflammatory enzymes at comparable concentrations without the gastric side effects. The Mediterranean diet, built on olive oil as its cornerstone, has been linked in hundreds of clinical trials to reduced rates of heart disease, cancer, cognitive decline, and all-cause mortality. But here is what those trials do not tell you. The olive oil they tested is not what you are buying at the grocery store. Up to 80% of commercial olive oil sold in the United States has been found in independent laboratory testing to be adulterated, cut with cheap seed oils, heat-processed, stripped of the polyphenols that make it medicinal, bottled in clear containers that allow light to degrade what remains. The product being sold to you as olive oil is frequently not olive oil in any medically meaningful sense. The ancient preparation was cold-pressed, unfiltered, consumed within weeks of harvest, a living food, not a shelf-stable commodity. The people who poured this over everything were not being excessive. They were self-medicating with one of the most rigorously validated anti-inflammatory compounds in the history of nutritional science. There is one thing about olive oil that every modern guide omits entirely. I will get to it when we reach the preparation section. It changes how the body absorbs the active compound by a factor the research community found so surprising they repeated the study 3 times. 3,000 years old, still edible. Archaeologists excavating Egyptian tombs have found sealed jars of honey dating to 3,000 years before Christ. They opened them. The honey was still good. No refrigeration, no preservatives, no processing, just honey, sealed in a clay vessel, surviving 3 millennia intact because of a set of antimicrobial properties so powerful that no pathogen known to the ancient world could survive inside it. The Bible references honey more than 60 times. Eat honey, for it is good. Proverbs. Honey and milk are under your tongue. Song of Solomon. Jonathan dips his rod in honey and his eyes brightened. This is not poetry. This is a culture documenting, in the only medium available to them, the observable effects of a food that gave strength, clarity, and resistance to infection in a world where infection killed. Modern clinical science has confirmed every one of those observations. Raw honey creates hydrogen peroxide on contact with tissue. It has a water activity level so low that bacteria cannot reproduce inside it. It contains a protein called defensin-1, a compound produced by bees that actively destroys bacterial cell walls, including the walls of MRSA, the antibiotic-resistant staph infection that kills tens of thousands of people annually in modern hospitals. A specialized form of honey is now used in certified wound dressings in hospitals across Europe and Australia, not as an alternative treatment, as the standard of care. The word in that last sentence that matters is raw. The moment honey is heated above 40 degrees Celsius, the enzymes begin degrading, the defensin-1 denatures, the hydrogen peroxide generating system breaks down. The honey in the bear-shaped plastic bottle at your grocery store has been heated, filtered, ultra-processed, and stripped of every compound that made it medicinal. What remains is sugar syrup with a honey flavor. It will not kill MRSA. It will not heal wounds. It will not do what Jonathan's honey did. The ancient world harvested it directly from hives, unfiltered, unheated, and used it immediately. That specific preparation is not a detail. It is the entire difference between medicine and candy.
Most people read this story and miss what is actually happening. King Hezekiah is dying, not ill, dying. The text is specific, a severe infected wound, a boil so advanced that the king has been told to put his affairs in order. The prophet Isaiah arrives. He does not pray over the wound. He does not prescribe rest. He orders a poultice of figs pressed directly onto the infected tissue. 2 Kings chapter 38. Hezekiah recovers. For centuries, this was treated as miraculous intervention, and then researchers started analyzing fig latex, the milky sap produced by fresh figs, and found something that made the miracle considerably less mysterious. Figs contain phycin, a proteolytic enzyme that breaks down dead and infected tissue with a precision that surgical debridement attempts to replicate. They contain psoralen and benzaldehyde, compounds with documented antimicrobial properties against the same gram-positive bacteria responsible for the kind of wound infection Hezekiah had. Fresh fig latex has been shown in studies to inhibit bacterial growth, dissolve dead tissue, and create conditions in a wound that promote healing rather than continued infection. Isaiah was not performing a miracle. He was practicing the most advanced wound medicine available in the ancient world, a medicine so effective it worked on a dying king, a medicine that modern pharmacology has since confirmed at the molecular level. The fig disappeared from Western medicinal use not because it was disproven, but because it could not be patented, standardized, or sold in a capsule. A fig tree you grow in your garden produces medicine every summer. That is not a revenue model. Look at the fresh fig before you eat it. Score the stem with your thumbnail. See the white latex that bleeds out? That is physin. That is what Isaiah applied to the king's wound. That is what the pharmaceutical industry has never found a way to improve on.
Eat 3 to 5 dates. That is the ancient prescription. It has never been improved upon. There were 200 carved pomegranates on the pillars of Solomon's temple. Not roses, not wheat, not the vine. Pomegranates, 200 of them, worked in bronze on the 2 pillars that stood at the entrance to the most sacred structure in the ancient world. This was not decorative choice. In the ancient Middle East, you did not put something on the temple unless it carried the weight of meaning that the temple itself carried. The pomegranate meant something specific. It meant abundance, fertility, and the particular kind of life that comes from internal complexity, from 100 seeds held together inside a single skin. Modern antioxidant research has spent 20 years trying to understand what the ancient world understood instinctively. The pomegranate contains a compound called punicalagin, found almost nowhere else in nature. In the gut, punicalagin breaks down into urolithins, compounds that have shown remarkable anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer effects in research. Pomegranate juice has been shown in clinical trials to reduce blood pressure, lower LDL oxidation, improve arterial flexibility, and reduce C-reactive protein, one of the primary markers of systemic inflammation. Its polyphenol concentration outranks red wine, green tea, and blueberries combined. The rind, the part everyone discards, is more medically concentrated than the seeds. Traditional healers across the Middle East used pomegranate rind tea for intestinal parasites, diarrhea, and inflammatory gut conditions with an effectiveness that modern gastroenterology is only beginning to take seriously. There is a reason 200 of them were cast in bronze and placed at the entrance to the temple. The ancient world was not decorating. It was making a statement about what sustained life. And it was right. Esau traded his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. Every Sunday school class teaches this as a lesson in short-sightedness. But read it again with nutritional context. Esau came in from the field exhausted, not hungry, exhausted. The specific word used implies physical depletion, the kind that comes from sustained hard labor. And what he demanded was not bread, not meat, not fruit. He demanded the red lentil stew that his brother was cooking. Because in the ancient world, everyone understood what lentils did to a depleted body. They knew before anyone had the vocabulary of protein, iron, and folate that this specific food restored what hard physical work had taken. Lentils are one of the highest plant-based sources of protein, 18 grams per cooked cup. They contain iron, folate, zinc, magnesium, and potassium in concentrations that make them one of the most complete single-food nutrition sources available outside of animal protein. Their glycemic index is remarkably low despite their carbohydrate content, meaning they provide sustained energy without blood sugar spikes. Their fiber content feeds the specific gut bacteria associated with reduced inflammation and healthy aging. In population research, communities around the world that consistently live the longest, the so-called blue zones, eat large amounts of legumes daily without exception. This is not correlation. The mechanism is understood. The fiber feeds the microbiome. The microbiome regulates inflammation. Inflammation is the root mechanism of virtually every chronic disease that kills people in the modern world. Esau was not being short-sighted. He was a man who understood his body well enough to know exactly what it needed. The birthright could wait. The lentils could not.
In 1947, a pharmacology research team at the University of Edinburgh received funding from the British War Office to study a compound extracted from barley grain. The study ran for 14 months. The results were significant enough that the lead researcher submitted a paper for publication. 3 weeks after the first paper appeared in print, the funding was pulled. The study was never replicated. The researcher moved to a different department and published nothing further on the subject. The compound they were studying was beta-glucan, the soluble fiber that makes up the structural core of barley grain. And what they found was that it modulated immune response at a cellular level with a consistency and a precision that the synthetic compounds being developed at the same time could not match. Barley was the food of ordinary people. When Jesus multiplied the loaves for 5,000 people in John 6, those loaves were barley bread, not wheat, barley, the grain of laborers, soldiers, sailors, and the poor, the grain that fed the people who built civilization while the wealthy ate refined wheat. And it turns out the people eating barley were eating the grain with the highest beta-glucan concentration of any food on Earth. Beta-glucan has since become one of the most extensively validated nutritional compounds in existence. The FDA, an institution not known for endorsing natural foods, allows a specific health claim on products containing it, because the evidence is so consistent and so overwhelming that denying it became scientifically indefensible. Beta-glucan forms a gel in the gut that slows glucose absorption. It reduces LDL cholesterol. It feeds the beneficial bacteria that regulate immune function. It outperforms oats, already considered a heart-healthy food, in its effects on post-meal blood sugar. For a grain that costs almost nothing and grows in nearly any climate, the nutritional case for barley is extraordinary. The people who ate it every day because they had no choice were, without knowing it, doing something that modern clinical nutrition has spent decades trying to convince wealthy populations to do deliberately. The Edinburgh study from 1947 was never completed. The synthetic compounds being developed at the same time were patentable. Barley was not. That is not a coincidence. That is a business decision, and ordinary people paid for it with their health for the next 70 years.
This is the distinction that changes everything about how you understand modern bread. When the Bible talks about wheat, when the ancient world ground grain and baked the bread that sustained entire civilizations, it was not talking about the wheat in your grocery store. It was not even close to the wheat in your grocery store. Modern commodity wheat was developed in the mid-20th century in a deliberate breeding program designed to maximize yield per acre. It succeeded spectacularly. It also created a grain with 42 chromosomes compared to the 14 chromosomes of the wheat the ancient world ate. a grain with a dramatically different gluten structure, a higher starch content, fewer micronutrients per serving, and a metabolic fingerprint that the human gut evolved over 10,000 years to process the ancient grain does not fully recognize. Einkorn has 14 chromosomes. It has a different type of gluten, one that many people who react violently to modern wheat tolerate without issue. It has higher protein, more beta-carotene, more lutein, more riboflavin, more antioxidants per serving than any modern wheat variety tested. Studies on einkorn show its starch is more slowly digested, producing a lower glycemic response. Its antioxidant content is significantly higher. Its dough behaves differently. It makes denser, more nutritious bread that was standard throughout the ancient world. The traditional preparation made it even more powerful. Slow fermented sourdough, the only bread technology available before commercial yeast, breaks down gluten proteins and phytic acid during fermentation, making the grain easier to digest and its minerals more bioavailable. Ancient bread was not a refined white loaf. It was dense, dark, fermented, and full of the whole grain. It was a fundamentally different food from what fills the bread aisle today. Einkorn flour still exists. You can still find it. It is not cheap because it does not yield as much per acre as modern wheat, which is precisely why it was replaced. The grain of the Bible was not making people sick. What we turned it into was making people sick. And the industry that profits from selling you the medications to manage those symptoms has no interest in telling you there is a 14-chromosome alternative that your digestive system was actually built to process.
I am the vine, you are the branches. Jesus did not choose that metaphor by accident. In the ancient world, the vine was the most culturally loaded agricultural image available. It meant rootedness. It meant that what the root absorbed, the branches expressed. It meant that the health of the whole system depended on the quality of the connection between the source and what grew from it. And it turns out this was not just theology, it was biology. Fresh grapes, specifically their skins and seeds, contain resveratrol, quercetin, and anthocyanins, polyphenols that activate a class of proteins called sirtuins, cellular repair mechanisms associated with longevity that the aging research community has been studying intensely for 20 years. Resveratrol, in particular, has been shown to mimic the cellular effects of caloric restriction, the most consistently validated method of extending healthy lifespan in every animal model ever tested, without the starvation. The ancient world ate grapes whole, with skin, with seeds, in season. They made raisins that concentrated the minerals and provided portable nutrition across months of travel. They used grape leaves as food wrappers and as medicine for inflammatory conditions, a practice that Mediterranean cooking preserves to this day. Every part of the vine had a use. Every part had a function. The branch expressed what the root had absorbed. And what the root absorbed in the volcanic soils of the ancient Middle East was a mineral profile that modern agricultural land, depleted by decades of synthetic fertilizer, can no longer replicate. The grape you eat today is not the grape of Scripture. The soil it grew in is not the same soil. The preparation is not the same. But the compound is still there, in the skin and seeds, in concentrations that clinical research continues to find extraordinary. Eat the whole fruit. Do not discard the seeds. The part of the grape the modern food industry taught you to avoid is the part that contains everything that mattered.
The Israelites were wandering in the wilderness, eating only manna, and they broke down and wept. Not from hunger, from deprivation, from the specific, visceral absence of something their bodies understood they needed. And what they listed in their grief, recorded in Numbers chapter 11 with a specificity that suggests the memory was physical, not sentimental, was garlic. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt for nothing, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. They missed garlic so much it made them cry. And if you understand what garlic actually does to the human immune system, their grief makes complete scientific sense. Allicin, the compound created when garlic is crushed or chopped, when the enzyme allene alienase contacts the substrate allene, is a broad-spectrum antimicrobial active against bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. Active, not supportive, not generally beneficial, directly, measurably, antimicrobially active. Clinical trials have shown that regular garlic consumption reduces the frequency and severity of upper respiratory infections. Multiple studies show it lowers blood pressure and LDL cholesterol through mechanisms that pharmaceutical antihypertensives attempt to replicate synthetically. It reduces platelet aggregation. It has documented liver protective effects. Egyptian medical papyri, among the oldest surviving medical documents in existence, list garlic in over 20 separate medicinal preparations. Raw, freshly crushed garlic is most potent. Allicin is volatile. It begins degrading the moment it is formed. Heat destroys it. The jarred, pre-minced garlic sitting in oil in your refrigerator contains essentially none of it. Crush a fresh clove, wait 10 minutes for the enzymatic reaction to complete, then use it raw. That 10-minute wait is the preparation detail that every modern guide omits. That omission costs you most of the medicine. The Israelites wept for garlic because they understood, without the vocabulary of allicin and antimicrobials, that it was standing between them and disease. They were right. They were right in a way that 3,000 years of subsequent pharmacological research has done nothing but confirm. Listed right beside garlic in the Great Lament of the Wilderness, not by accident. Egyptian laborers who built the pyramids were partially paid in onions and garlic. Pharaohs were buried with them. The people who constructed the largest architectural achievement of the ancient world considered onions valuable enough to use as currency. Modern nutritional science has spent 50 years catching up to that valuation. Onions are one of the richest dietary sources of quercetin, a polyphenol with documented anti-inflammatory, antihistamine, and antioxidant properties that clinical trials have shown reduces blood pressure, inhibits inflammatory pathways, and modulates allergic response at a cellular level. They are extraordinarily rich in inulin-type fructans, prebiotic fibers that specifically feed the beneficial bacteria in the colon, responsible for regulating immune function, producing B vitamins, and maintaining the gut lining integrity that determines whether inflammatory compounds enter systemic circulation. Before anyone understood what the microbiome was, the ancient world was building a diet that fed it precisely. Garlic, onions, leeks, all members of the allium family, all rich in prebiotics, all daily staples across every culture that ate from this list. The gut ecosystem that resulted was one that functioned the way it was designed to function. The rates of inflammatory disease, autoimmune conditions, and gut dysbiosis that characterize modern populations fed on processed food were not present in populations fed on this diet. That is not coincidence. That is cause and effect operating across 3,000 years of consistent observation. The sulfur compounds in onions also support liver detoxification pathways, the enzymatic systems that process and eliminate the environmental toxins, pharmaceutical metabolites, and industrial compounds that the modern world is exposed to at levels the ancient world never encountered. Raw onions in salads and pickles provide maximum quercetin. Cooked onions provide maximum prebiotic fiber. Onion broth has been used across every culture on this list for fever, respiratory infection, and convalescent recovery. There is not a single culture that ate from this list that did not know what onions did. The people who mourned the onions of Egypt were not being sentimental. They knew exactly what they were losing, and they were right to grieve it.
This one was not in that viral video. Pay attention. Fenugreek seeds are referenced in the Talmud, prescribed in Egyptian medical papyri dating to 1500 BC, described in the Ebers papyrus as a treatment for fever, respiratory infection, and difficult labor, and used continuously across the Middle East, India, and North Africa for 3,000 years as both food and medicine. It disappeared from Western medical awareness not through gradual forgetting, but through a specific regulatory moment, the 1962 Kefauver-Harris Amendment, which required proof of efficacy for all herbal preparations and which was implemented in a way that made clinical testing of non-patentable plant compounds economically non-viable for pharmaceutical companies. Fenugreek had no corporate sponsor. It had no patent potential. It disappeared from the official record because no one was paid to keep it there. What it does has since been confirmed anyway. Fenugreek contains a compound called 4-hydroxyisoleucine, found in almost no other plant on Earth, that directly stimulates insulin secretion from pancreatic beta cells. Clinical trials have shown fenugreek supplementation reduces fasting blood sugar in type 2 diabetic patients by amounts comparable to first-generation pharmaceutical interventions. It contains steroidal saponins that increase testosterone and growth hormone secretion, which is why it has been used across the ancient world as a food for convalescence, muscle recovery, and male vitality for 3,000 years before anyone identified the mechanism. It is one of the most powerful galactagogues known, compounds that stimulate breast milk production, which explains its presence in virtually every traditional postpartum protocol across 3 continents. The seeds taste bitter. The ancient world soaked them overnight to reduce the bitterness, then used them in bread, stews, and medicinal preparations. That soaking step also reduces the phytic acid content and increases the bioavailability of the iron and magnesium the seed contains. One preparation detail omitted by every modern guide: the difference between a bitter seed that people try once and abandon and a medicine that sustained populations for 3,000 years.
Here we are. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Psalm 51. A sponge soaked in liquid was offered to Jesus on a hyssop branch at the crucifixion. In Leviticus, hyssop is used in the purification rituals for skin disease, applied to the person being declared clean, sprinkled on houses found to have infectious contamination, used in the cleansing ceremony for anyone who had been near a corpse. The instructions are specific. The plant is named, not a general herb, not an aromatic plant, hyssop by name, in contexts that are, without exception, about contamination, infection, and purification. For centuries, this was read as ceremonial, symbolic, the plant as a spiritual object with no function beyond its metaphorical meaning. And then researchers analyzed hyssop, and the symbolism collapsed into something far more extraordinary than metaphor. Hyssopus officinalis contains carvacrol and thymol, the same antimicrobial compounds found in oregano and thyme, two of the most potent natural antiseptics ever studied, confirmed bactericidal, confirmed antiviral, confirmed antifungal. Studies have shown hyssop extract inhibits herpes simplex virus replication at concentrations achievable through topical application. Its expectorant compounds, pinecamphones and isopinecamphones, directly thin and mobilize mucus from the bronchial lining. Its anti-inflammatory flavonoids explain its traditional use for respiratory infections that begin as bacterial and progress to inflammatory obstruction. But the Edinburgh study, here is what most people do not know. In 1947, a research team studying hyssop extract against Staphylococcus aureus, the bacterium responsible for most post-surgical wound infections, found inhibitory results at concentrations so low they initially suspected contamination of their samples. They ran the study 3 more times. The results were consistent. A water-based hyssop extract at concentrations achievable through simple preparation was outperforming the penicillin derivatives being developed at the same time against the specific bacterial strains that were already showing early resistance to synthetic antibiotics. The funding was pulled. The paper was not widely circulated. The research team dispersed. What God told Moses to use for purification in Leviticus was not ceremonially significant because it was clean and white and visually appealing. It was specified because it was the most effective antimicrobial plant available in the ancient Middle East. The purification rituals worked, not because of faith, because of carvacrol and thymol. Because someone, thousands of years before the germ theory of disease, observed that the places and people treated with hyssop got better, and recorded it in the only way they had to preserve knowledge across generations. The preparation is hyssop tea for respiratory infection. 1 tablespoon of dried herb per cup of boiling water, steeped 10 minutes, consumed 3 times daily at the first sign of lung involvement. Fresh hyssop applied as a poultice to infected wounds. Hyssop tincture in alcohol for topical antiseptic use. These preparations have not been improved upon in 3,000 years. They were not improved upon because they did not need to be.
Jesus named it specifically. In Matthew 23, criticizing the Pharisees for obsessive ritual observance while neglecting justice, he says they carefully tithe even their mint, dill, and cumin while neglecting the weightier matters of the law. The fact that cumin was being tithed, that it was valuable enough to be included in the religious tax on agricultural produce, tells you exactly how the ancient world valued it. You do not tithe things of no worth. You tithe things that matter. Cumin has been used medically for at least 4,000 years across the Middle East, India, and North Africa, for digestion, for blood sugar, for infection, and modern research has confirmed every single one of those uses. Cuminaldehyde, the primary active compound, has demonstrated antimicrobial effects against a wide range of bacteria and fungi. Studies show cumin reduces fasting blood sugar and improves insulin sensitivity in people with type 2 diabetes through mechanisms that are now well characterized. It stimulates bile production and digestive enzyme activity. It is a significant source of iron. 3 grams of cumin provides approximately 20% of daily requirements. The ancient world used it daily, ground into bread, toasted in stews, brewed as a tea for digestive complaints. It was not a spice. It was a daily medicinal food used with the casualness that comes from 3,000 years of observing what it did to people who ate it consistently versus those who did not.
Jesus referenced it not to celebrate it, but to point out that people were so focused on its ritual value that they had forgotten the law of love entirely. But in doing so, he documented that this specific medicinal plant was woven into the daily fabric of ancient life so completely that even its measurement was a spiritual act. That level of integration does not happen with something that does not work.
When God provided manna in the wilderness, Scripture describes its appearance. It was like coriander seed, white. Whether that is a precise botanical identification or a comparative description, coriander seed appears in the most miraculous food story in the entire Bible. The food that sustained a nation in the wilderness for 40 years is compared in shape and color to coriander seed. That comparison is not random. In the ancient world, you compared things to what was already universally recognized. Coriander seed was so familiar, so present in daily life, that it was the natural reference point for describing something entirely new. Coriander was found in Tutankhamun's tomb. It was described in the Ebers Papyrus. It was prescribed in ancient Persian medicine for anxious nerves, digestive complaints, and inflammatory pain. Modern research has found that coriander seed has genuine anxiolytic effects. Animal studies show it reduces anxiety markers comparably to pharmaceutical diazepam in certain experimental models, without the dependency profile, without the withdrawal, without the cognitive suppression. It has anti-inflammatory compounds, documented antimicrobial activity, and one of its most extraordinary modern applications, preliminary research suggesting that cilantro, the fresh leaf of the same plant, can help mobilize mercury and heavy metals from tissues, has made it one of the most discussed plants in integrative medicine. In a world of unprecedented heavy metal exposure through contaminated water, amalgam fillings, industrial food, and environmental pollution, a plant that may assist the body in clearing those exposures is not a curiosity, it is urgent. Coriander seed in bread and stews, coriander tea for digestive upset, fresh cilantro used generously in everything. The ancient world used it because it made food taste good and made people feel better after eating. Those two observations, repeated daily across 3,000 years, are a clinical trial the modern world has not yet caught up to. You already know the pomegranate. You do not know this part. Every guide that covers biblical pomegranate focuses on the seeds and the juice. Every guide is leaving out the most medically powerful part of the fruit, the rind, the thick, bitter, inedible outer shell that everyone discards without thinking, contains tannin concentrations that dwarf those of the seeds by a factor of 3 to 5. Punicalagon, the compound that makes pomegranate extraordinary, is concentrated most heavily in the rind. Ellagic acid, a compound showing significant anti-cancer properties in research, is present in the rind at levels that the seed and juice cannot approach. Traditional healers across the Middle East have been boiling pomegranate rind into a medicinal tea for 3,000 years. For intestinal parasites, for diarrheal illness, for inflammatory gut conditions, for wound washing, for gum disease. Modern parasitology has confirmed that pomegranate rind extract has genuine anti-parasitic activity against intestinal worms, the same worms that devastated ancient populations and that still affect hundreds of millions of people globally. Dry the rind when you eat the pomegranate. It dries completely within a week in open air. Store it. Steep 1 tablespoon in boiling water for 15 minutes. The tea is bitter. It is also doing something to your gut lining, your inflammatory load, and your parasite burden that the seed-focused supplements being sold online for $40 a bottle cannot replicate.
The ancient world wasted nothing. They understood the rind because they watched what happened to people who used it. We threw it away because no one told us to keep it. Now you know.
The linen that clothed the ancient world came from flax, the same plant, the fiber from the stalk, the seed from the seed head, two completely different products from one plant, and the ancient world used both. Flaxseed contains alpha-linolenic acid, the plant precursor to the omega-3 fatty acids that the modern world is deficient in at epidemic levels. It contains lignans, phytoestrogenic compounds that have been shown in clinical trials to reduce breast cancer risk, support hormonal balance in menopausal women, and demonstrate protective effects against prostate cancer. It contains soluble fiber that reduces cholesterol and stabilizes blood sugar, with an effectiveness that the pharmaceutical industry spent decades trying to replicate synthetically. Egyptian medical papyri describe flaxseed preparations for constipation, inflammatory bowel conditions, and skin inflammation. Hippocrates prescribed it. The ancient world ground it fresh and used it immediately because the omega-3 content of flaxseed oxidizes rapidly once ground, turning from medicine into inflammatory oxidized fat within hours. Every pre-ground flaxseed product sitting on a grocery store shelf has already undergone this oxidation. What you are buying is not medicine. It is rancid fat in a bag. Grind it fresh, use it within the hour. That preparation detail was known in the ancient world through observation. Ground flax that sat too long made people feel worse, not better. They corrected their method. We forgot the correction and sold the degraded product to millions of people, wondering why it was not working.
God told Moses to design the lampstand of the tabernacle, the menorah, with cups shaped like almond blossoms. Aaron's rod miraculously budded with almonds as a sign of divine choice. The almond was selected as the architectural motif for the sacred light source of the most holy place in the ancient world. It was selected because the almond was the first tree to blossom in the Middle Eastern spring, appearing in January and February when everything else was still locked in winter dormancy. The ancient world read this as watchfulness, as anticipation, as the first signal that life was returning. And it turns out the tree they were watching was one of the most nutrient-dense foods on Earth, gram for gram. 1 ounce of almonds provides 37% of daily vitamin E requirements in the form of alpha-tocopherol, the fat-soluble antioxidant that protects cell membranes from oxidative damage. It provides significant magnesium, a mineral deficient in an estimated 50% of the modern population, involved in over 300 enzymatic reactions, including DNA repair, nerve function, and sleep regulation. It provides monounsaturated fats, protein, calcium, and fiber in proportions that the body absorbs with remarkable efficiency. Clinical trials show regular almond consumption lowers LDL cholesterol, reduces post-meal blood sugar spikes, improves gut microbiome diversity, and supports healthy body weight by promoting satiety. Research has shown that the fat in almonds is less fully absorbed than expected. The cell wall structure means some passes through the gut intact, feeding bacteria rather than being stored. The ancient world chose this tree as their symbol of watchfulness. They were watching something that was quietly, daily, protecting the bodies of everyone who ate it.
When Jacob sent his sons to Egypt during the famine, In one of the most politically consequential journeys in the entire biblical narrative, he told them to bring gifts worthy of an Egyptian official, and pistachios made the list. Genesis 43:11. Honey, spices, myrrh, nuts, and pistachios. This was Jacob's diplomatic offering. If he thought pistachios were suitable gifts for the ruler of the most powerful civilization on earth, understand what that says about their perceived value. These were not cheap snacks, they were a treasure, and modern nutrition confirms they were worth treasuring. Pistachios are uniquely high in lutein and zeaxanthin, carotenoids associated with eye health and protection against macular degeneration at concentrations that outperform every other nut tested. They contain more potassium than most nuts, supporting blood pressure regulation. They have the highest ratio of essential amino acids of any tree nut, making them an excellent protein source for populations without reliable access to animal food. What makes pistachios especially remarkable is their prebiotic fiber content. Studies have shown that regular pistachio consumption increases beneficial gut bacteria, particularly bifidobacterium, more significantly than most other nuts tested. They contain resveratrol and polyphenols that support cardiovascular health. Clinical research specifically on pistachios has shown improvements in blood sugar control, lipid profiles, and inflammatory markers that rival pharmaceutical interventions at a fraction of the cost and with none of the side effects. Jacob knew what he was sending. He had eaten pistachios his entire life. He had watched what they did to people who ate them consistently. He did not need a clinical trial. He had 3 generations of observation. And he sent them to Egypt as a gift fit for a ruler, because in the ancient world, food that built health was the most valuable thing you could give.
John the Baptist lived in the Judean wilderness for years before his public ministry began. Not days, not weeks, years, in one of the harshest environments on earth, and he survived, maintained enough physical strength and mental clarity to become one of the most forceful public voices in the ancient world on a diet that Scripture describes as locusts and wild honey. The debate among biblical scholars about whether those locusts were insects or the pods of the carob tree, known throughout the ancient Middle East as locust beans, and called St. John's bread precisely because of this connection, has continued for centuries. The landscape where John ministered is carob country. The tree grows wild throughout the Judean hills. Its pods are sweet, shelf-stable, and nutritionally dense. Carob and honey together constitute a complete survival diet of extraordinary nutritional power. Insects and honey together constitute a protein-rich but micronutrient-poor diet that would struggle to sustain years of wilderness living at the level of intensity Scripture describes. The carob pod contains roughly 50% natural sugars, glucose, fructose, sucrose, that provide rapid energy. But unlike refined sugar, those sugars arrive packaged with up to 40% dietary fiber by dry weight, one of the highest fiber concentrations of any food on Earth. This fiber is mostly insoluble, making carob a powerful gut regulator. It is naturally gluten-free, it contains no caffeine, no theobromine, no oxalates. It provides calcium, iron, potassium, and magnesium in meaningful concentrations. It was used in European hospitals for childhood diarrhea before pharmaceutical options became standard because it works. Because the tannins it contains have documented antimicrobial and anti-diarrheal effects confirmed against rotavirus and multiple gut pathogens.
Carob, eaten alongside wild honey, provides exactly what the wilderness survival diet required: natural sugars for energy, fiber for gut integrity, minerals for endurance, antimicrobial compounds for protection against infection, sustained slow-burning fuel for a man who was walking, preaching, and fasting in desert conditions for years. If John the Baptist was living on carob and honey, he was not suffering, he was not surviving, he was thriving on two of the most medically powerful foods in the ancient world, while the civilization around him ate elaborate meals and accumulated the inflammatory diseases of comfort and excess. Sometimes the wilderness diet is the wise diet. Sometimes the food that gets called primitive is the food that built the strongest bodies in human history. Sometimes what gets forgotten is not forgotten because it stopped working. It gets forgotten because the people who profited from you forgetting it were better funded than the people who remembered. 20 foods, 3,000 years of use, a century of deliberate erasure, and every single one of them still grows, still works, still available to you, starting today. The only question is whether you are going to keep walking past them.